What's going on? It's your boy Nate Be Lit, because Nate really does be lit, and we are back again with another market outlook, right? So today, I've actually been looking forward to this one because last week I actually missed it because I was just very busy. So I'm happy to be back like I never left. Now, quick disclaimer before I do continue. I'm in some jungly looking place right now. I took the car and I was like, cool, let me just find somewhere to park where it's cool, because right now it's like 31 degrees or 32 degrees right now, and I am absolutely about to turn into a chocolate milkshake. So I decided to come and find somewhere where it was shady. So I'm in some jungly kind of area. So if you hear any screams of children, because I think there's children somewhere about, or any sort of noise or birds or whatever, I'm gonna need you to excuse that, right? So let's get into it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, first things first, what's been going on with the dollar? Because we know the dollar is the world reserve currency, right? So the most important currency for us to be looking at right now. So from an inflationary standpoint, what has been going on? So from a year over year standpoint, across all of the inflationary measures that the Fed look at, they look at PCE, they look at CPI, they look at PPI, which are all measures of inflation that the Fed use to see if inflation is going up or going down. Now, all of them on a year over year standpoint have actually upticked, right? So I do believe that we can be in the midst of a dollar retracement to the upside, and I'll show you what that will look like shortly as well. But you guys know I love to go through the fundamentals first because it drives everything, right? So inflationary measures for the year over year inflationary measures that the Fed look at are all upticking, right? So I do think we will get some sort of retracement on the dollar. Now, does that mean that we can't be wrong on that? No, it doesn't, because on a month over month, I think the growth has actually slowed this month as opposed to the month before. So what does that mean for those that don't understand? So when we look at the reading from April to May, we saw price go from 0.1% to 0.2%. So that's a 0.3% uptick on a month to month basis, right? However, from May till June, we only had we had a 0.1% drop. So inflation is cooling. So technically, do we have to see a retracement? No, but do the probabilities lean more that way? I believe so, because year over year you have more data and they are all upticking, right? So I do believe we will see some sort of retracement on the dollar. So what have we got going on for this month, or for this week, should I say? So important news: we've got Fed Chair Powell speaking on Tuesday, which is going to obviously shed some light as to what can potentially happen moving forward, or what the Fed's outlook on inflation and interest rates and so on and so forth should be, and obviously what they may think about in regards to Trump's tariffs, which will be stopping the pause on July the 8th, if I'm not mistaken, so in about 8 days from now. So they're probably going to speak about that to some extent. We're also going to be looking at, I'm going to be paying attention to the Japanese yen news that comes out on Tuesday. Bank of Japan is obviously going to have their meeting. So obviously Governor Ueda is going to be speaking on that day. So it's going to be key to look at what's going on in regards to that. We did have the yen's inflation rate reading come out last week, and it actually came out lower. It went lower from 3.6% down to 3.1%. So their inflation is lowering. However, it's still way above their 2% target, right? It's like 1.1% away, which is not where they want it. So could they potentially increase the rates, creating a stronger yen? Potentially so. So obviously I'm going to be looking at what's going on in regards to that news on Tuesday. We've got JOLTS job openings as well, which is going to be interesting. We've got NFP on Thursday, which is very interesting actually. We've got that on Thursday, which is going to be a very interesting reading, or may not be. The past few have been underwhelming, if I do say so. And then we've also got average hourly earnings as well, which can inflict what can happen with, the dollar. Because if you think about how does it work, right? The more money people are making, the more money people will be spending, which will drive up inflation. So if the average hourly earnings go up, it will mean that obviously, people are going to be earning more money, if you will, right? Also, we've got Swiss franc CPI coming out on Thursday as well. Whether that's going to, make my bias on Swiss franc driven pairs change, I don't really think it will personally. But we'll have to wait until Thursday for that news to come up. Remember, our job is to not guess, but to look at the data and ascertain what that will mean moving forward, right? And make decisions based on those data releases and on those, those news releases coming out, right? We're not guessers. We are, again, we look at the market, what the numbers come out as, and we move forward from that, right? So, ladies and gents, by the way, if I'm slow at any point, bear with me because it's bloody hot right now, right? So moving on. What's going on with these pairs? So let's have a look. Starting off with the dollar, right? So if I just zoom out, let me just remove the menu from there as well. Cool. So if we look at what's been going on, we've been bearish on the dollar since, we've had this bearish leg since the 14th of January, right? So we've been bearish up to this point, but now seeing that we're having these upticks in inflation across the board, again, CPI, PCE, and PPI, there's no coincidence as to why we're starting to accumulate at the same time. As obviously we've had all of those readings come out. PCE came out last week Friday, and as we've had PCE come out last Friday higher, what that means for me is, we can start to see the dollar start to retrace, and looks like we're accumulating right now in order to do so. So I think we will potentially start to see the dollar, make its way higher. Now, if we start to distribute in here, will I entertain sells? Yes. But again, that will also be in conjunction with what is said in these next coming Fed readings, So obviously Jerome Powell speaking on Tuesday or Wednesday this week. So I'll be having a listen into what's been happening with that. If what they're saying is more on the bullish side for the dollar, so if they start talking about they're not looking to cut rates, if they start looking at, start saying things like, inflation, is set to go up, and if they start to have more of a bullish, a tone of we're not really looking to cut the rates anytime soon because of, Trump's tariffs and all this other stuff that the Fed continuously say, as they've been saying over the past few months, then I'm going to just continue with the bullish bias. And I think maybe we could get a larger retracement up until, these higher areas up here. I mean, if we come to the daily, technically this is the previous redistribution, the largest redistribution anyway. Can price retrace up to these areas and come lower from here? They can, but if we get the next few readings come out and they're also upticking, then we can see price make its way up until this point, and I will not be surprised for that. So that's what I'm looking at on the dollar. So moving on to Euro USD and GBP USD, if I'm expecting the dollar to retrace to the upside, then that means I'm going to be waiting for or anticipating Euro USD and GBP USD making their ways lower. So what should that start to look like? I mean, we know that Euro USD is the complete inverse of what the dollar is, right? So if we look at that first, we can see that at the same time as the dollar was obviously potentially setting up for that accumulation to go higher, this potentially could be setting up to come lower, right? We've got this area down here, and obviously this area down here as well, where price can potentially come to give us that next bullish leg. So that's going to be a little while away from now, depending on obviously what they say in regards to inflation and interest rates and so on and so forth. So for me, I do want to start to see price make its way lower to these sort of areas. But again, I'm going to be very attentive to what is said in these next, few readings, because you got to remember what the Fed say about the data is going to have a massive impact on what we see with the dollar and obviously in turn Euro USD and GBP USD. So moving over to GBP USD, I'm looking at something relatively similar, We've got this previous reaccumulation at this point. I do want to see, price make its way lower, give a larger retracement. Now, can price go from here? Again, like I said with Euro USD, it definitely can go higher from this point. But again, depending on what is said in these next, Fed meetings or their speeches, if you will, then obviously that will kind of determine what my outlook will be moving forward. But up until that point, I'm looking at these coming, significantly lower, right? We've been due a retracement for a little while. So I'm going to be looking at this area down here, and if failing that, if we break this, then that break is going to give price permission to make its way all the way down to potentially, this 50% of this larger reaccumulation down here as well, right? So for me, that's what I'm going to be looking at. Again, I'm going to be very attentive to what happens in regards to, coming news releases as well. I think we've got the next CPI on the 11th of July, if I'm not mistaken. So that will obviously give us some idea as to what we can look at moving forward, right? So moving on to USD CAD. So USD CAD, what am I looking at for USD CAD? Now, I know that USD CAD is obviously driven by the Canadian dollar. the last the last inflation reading, I believe, I should know this, I think it came lower. However, it's still, you know, not at their target. So for me, I'm gonna continue with my bullish narrative. You know, if we look at what's been going on with US dollar CAD on a higher time frame perspective for a minute, you know, we had a massive arse distribution that led to this larger reaccumulation getting broken. So that's telling me that sellers on a higher time frame are coming into the market, or have come into, they're in control of the market right now, should I say, right? Now, as we came into the 50 and 80, which we know is supply, you know, the institutions want to sell from supply, they want to sell high and they want to buy low. And right now, obviously, from a higher time frame perspective, price is pretty high up in price, you know, so high up in price. Price is pretty high up in supply, should I say, right? And as we started to see this, if I just remove these drawings for a minute, we can see that, you know, sellers are starting to come in. You know, we've got, you know, sellers adding sell orders in here, you know, adding sell orders in here, adding sell orders in here. We've obviously manipulated the highs, so I'm expecting to see, not expecting, I'm anticipating to see, you know, price continue its way lower, you know. So if I just bring the drawings back for a minute, we have got quite a quite a target to the downside. You know, my first target is obviously going to be down here, so I'm going to be entertaining sells if I'm being very honest. Right now, if I come down to a lower time frame, we've been doing exactly that. You know, we've been selling off. We had a distribution followed by a redistribution, which is, you know, the bearish market cycle. So we've now come into the most previous redistribution, right? And on a lower time frame, the market cycle would have given an accumulation, reaccumulation. We've now broken below this previous reaccumulation. So for me, you know, we've seen price give a retracement. It did break above this technically, but redistributions don't dictate structure, market structure. It's usually the distributions that do that. So we have obviously broken above this, so I can delete this really if I really wanted to, right? And price hasn't actually invalidated this high yet. So for me, I'm still entertaining the sellers coming in. So what I want to see moving forward is potentially price breaking below this low to confirm this thing as a larger redistribution. And once we get that, then I want to see price potentially make its way higher up until this point to come into here, get some sellers potentially to come in here, and then obviously make our way lower. So that's what I want to see on USD CAD. If we can get that, then my target would obviously be the low of whatever, you know, wherever the low is printed before we make our retracement up here. And if I wanted to hold this for longer, provided the fundamentals are in line with this as well, then I'll be looking to target these lows as well to complete this whole thing as a larger redistribution, right? So, you know, it could be a very, very fruitful move if we catch it right. So I'm going to keep my eyes out for that on USD CAD. Now, moving lower, I've actually been looking at what what Euro Pound has been doing. I did want to see, at the time of markup, which was last night, I did want to see price come into this previous reaccumulation and obviously make its way higher. However, it looks like price is about to pop the high. So if price does take out the high, then I will be deleting all of this, and I want to see something like this where price breaks the high, triggers my alert should I say, comes in, and obviously I want to see buyers coming from this point to send this market even higher, right? A higher time frame target or longer term target potentially could be these highs. You know, if I just zoom out to the higher time frame for a minute, we were unable to, well, actually no, let me zoom out even further than that. So to me, what it looks like is as follows, right? So let me just go to the weekly, actually might make things a little bit easier. So on a higher time frame, it looks like we are pretty damn bullish. You know, we've been printing, you know, reaccumulations. We've come into the previous reaccumulation at the 50, you know, where the institutions like to buy, like the 50% and below. 50% and below and a bullish market cycle is obviously demand, and obviously if you flip it around to a bearish market cycle, then the 50% and above is obviously supply. So for me personally, you know, I want to see these highs potentially get taken out. We had an accumulation out of the previous reaccumulation. Hope you guys are still following. Now, upon doing so, we've tried to distribute, couldn't make our way lower, right? And now if I come to the daily time frame for a minute, you know, we were printing a bearish market cycle up until this point, you know, where we had the distribution, we came lower, accumulated, price made some legway higher, came lower, if the sellers were still in control, to me, we would have broken this low. Now, the fact that we didn't and then ended up accumulating, and it looks like we are on the verge of completing yet another reaccumulation, provided this high gets taken out, to me, that looks like, that looks like buyers are in control to me. And if the buyers are in control, I want to be looking for buyers. So if I come down to a lower time frame, we had an accumulation down here out of 50% of the previous reaccumulation and the larger accumulation that obviously sent price to make this massive leg to the upside. So now we've accumulated, we have wiped out some liquidity to the downside so that institutions could fill buy orders, and by the looks of it, buyers are absolutely taking this thing by storm. So, and I believe we've just taken the high out as well. So I want to see price retrace back into, I can actually delete all of this now. And then what I want to see is price potentially, if TradingView wants to work with me. Okay, maybe not, but I can edit that later. But basically, I want to see price come into the 50% of this thing here, right? If price can come into the 50%, come in, give an accumulation, and send it, make its way higher, then I'll be looking to play out of these little accumulations down here. If price can come into something like that, that would be absolutely fantastic, and I'll be looking to take this thing higher, and potentially capitalize on lower time frame reaccumulations as well. Again, you can hear that car, then excuse me, right? Because I don't even know this area that I've just come into. It looks like a jungle, like I mentioned earlier. So I don't know who's going to be coming in and out of this place. But yeah, so in terms of euro pound, I want to see price make its way down here, give an accumulation, and obviously send price higher. Higher time frame target would obviously be up here. So we've got quite a long way to go. Will I be trying to hold buys all the way up here? Absolutely not. Because like I say, and I think almost all of my market outlooks, only a fool will try and hold their positions, their full positions to their main target. You always want to be taking partials and paying yourself, because you never know what the market can do. The price can just go against you at any point. So moving on down to USD JPY, obviously, like I mentioned earlier, their inflation actually came lower last reading. So because their inflation reading came lower last reading, but didn't actually quite come down to their 2% target, which I think we've got quite a way to go until we hit that point. I do think that we can potentially still see rate hikes on the Japanese yen, and if we do see that, then obviously that will send Japanese yen stronger, which would mean that USD JPY will make its way lower. So I'm still entertaining sales on this thing. If I zoom out to a high enough time frame, you'll be able to see that we had a previous reaccumulation up here that was broken. We made our way back up to 50% of this distribution, right? Came into 50%, we ended up distributing, which then broke a previous reaccumulation, turning this thing into a distribution. Price has obviously redistributed, come back into just about, or just missed the 50%, and as I come down to a lower time frame now, we've just done very similar to what we did up here. We ended up, if we look at the market cycle from down here, we accumulated, we reaccumulated, obviously would have had a little distribution up here to break this thing, and now we've obviously come to the 80%, and we've reacted from that to come lower again. So for me personally, I'm all the way looking at sells on this thing. I would rather entertain sells at this point than buys, because the larger economics, the macroeconomics, if you will, support that narrative. So if I come down to the lower time frame, after we reacted from the 80%, we would have had a distribution in here. We can actually see, if I zoom in, you can see what's known as a rally base drop, which is just higher time frame talk for the distribution up here, right? So we redistributed to make our way lower. We came into, I'll come down to 15, you can see it a bit better. We came into the last distribution that created, or that caused this low down here and this low to get, well, this is the low that we really would have been looking at. The redistribution caused this low to get broken, and then price came back into it, and then obviously distributed and end up breaking this, this order flow, if you will. So I want to see price come back up into the 50-80 region, where sellers would be wanting to add more sales into the market, and I'm going to be looking to sell this thing down to this target down here. If it doesn't quite come up to the 50%, does that mean I'm not going to take sales? No, I'll wait for the distribution, and then on the lower time frame, if we can get it, then I'll wait for the redistribution. You know, it looks like we've had a distribution up here. You know, could it be a larger distribution? Definitely. Or could we even get a final manipulation that brings us into the 50? We definitely could. So it's Monday. I don't trade Mondays anyway, so I'll be coming back to revisit this tomorrow morning to see if we can get some potential sells down. So moving on down to gold. I'll be honest, gold for me, I don't really trade gold so often. You know, I will if obviously if it presents an opportunity, but it hasn't presented an opportunity for me since I think like February this year or January even. So what I'm looking at for gold, we just zoom out for a minute, we can see, we come to the daily very quickly. You know, we are heavily bullish right now. So for me, I'm just going to continue, you know, looking for buys, you know, wherever they may present. So we had the previous reaccumulation, price didn't come into the 50%, but did give an accumulation out of it. Price doesn't always need to come to the 50%. So, you know, we had some sort of distribution up here on the lower time frame. We had a redistribution. Price has obviously come down into the previous reaccumulation, and then obviously we've now broken this high. So, you know, if we've broken order flow to the upside, that means potentially buyers could have stepped in. How do we know if the buyers are going to continue? You know, once we come into the 50%, I'm going to need to see evidence of buyers coming in. So if I can see evidence of buyers coming inside of here, I want to see an accumulation, then potentially I might just entertain buyers from this, right? However, am I going to hold my breath? Absolutely not. The reason I say that is because silver is it looks like it's leading the show right now. If I step out on a higher time frame, leading the show, and we have got quite a way to come lower on silver, right? So if silver's got quite a way to come lower and it's leading the show, potentially gold can follow suit and also come a bit lower as well. So, you know, and obviously if that's to be the case, from where we're looking at right now, that could just pull this thing lower. So I don't really want to be too hasty, if I'm being honest. You know, I'll wait for the accumulation. To be safe, I might even wait for a reaccumulation just to confirm that buyers are actually stepping in. And then maybe I'll take some buyers to target these highs maybe. But again, you know, a lot of that is going to be resting on what silver wants to do as well. You know, silver, with this here, we just zoom out onto a higher time frame very quickly. You know, we are bullish, you know. So I'm not saying that, you know, I'm not looking for buys. I'm just saying I'm not really hasty to look. I'm not really going to be hasty to look at buys right now. You know, we did have some sort of distribution up here, but this could be a larger distribution, you know, with, you know, some sellers coming in, maybe with final manipulation, obviously price to make its way lower. But as I'm just looking at this now, you know, this potentially could be a distribution. If we get, you know, we've got this, if we get a break of the high and price comes back into this 50%, you know, where buyers would want to step in, then maybe I might entertain some buyers. But again, that's going to be later in the week, if that is even this week at all. So again, I'm not going to hold my breath too much on this. So USD CHF is going to be the last currency I'm going to go through in regards to this. Then we'll move over to indices. I'm not looking at NZD USD or AUD USD because they just look absolutely shit. Excuse my language. Right. So, what's been going on with USD CHF? So, for me, USD CHF is a very tricky one, because in times of uncertainty, which, you know, we're having currently, you know, because of obviously Trump's tariffs and, you know, the uncertainty as to what is going to happen moving forward. Is there going to be inflation? Is there what, you know, a lot of people are uncertain right now, you know. So in times of uncertainty, what often we will see is that people will stockpile their money into safe haven assets. One of the biggest safe haven assets being Swiss franc, you know, which is why if we look at the Swiss franc futures for a minute, we can see that we are bullish, right? So if we're bullish on this, we obviously know that Swiss franc futures trades the opposite direction of what USD CHF trades, right? So if that's the case, if we just come back to Swiss franc USD CHF for a minute, we can see that obviously we're trading to the downside. So again, money's flowing into Swiss franc because it's a safe haven asset, which means obviously if this trades against it, you know, I'm going to be looking for sells on this. So my two areas that I'm going to be looking at is either going to be this redistribution that causes this low to get broken, or B, coming up to the actual 50% of the overall redistribution to give sells. So I'm going to be looking at both of these. If price shows evidence of sellers coming in from these areas here, I'm going to be taking sells. And if price does it from here, I'm going to be taking sells from here. Whichever one it wants to do, I'm easy. I don't really care, to be honest. I'm impartial. I'm going to take an impartial approach. I don't care which one it does. If evidence of sellers comes in here, great. If it comes in here, whichever, I don't really care, to be honest, right? But I will be being very attentive to both, just in case, because again, if we can get sells from up here, my target will obviously be wherever the low is printed before we make our way up here, which means obviously, it'll be a pretty nice target, right? So that's it for currencies. I'm not looking at NZD-USD or AUD-USD because they both just look like shit, excuse my language. So moving over to indices, right? So what's going on with indices? Now, if we're seeing inflation coming up for like the upticking for the US dollar, it would make the most sense to start being on the sell side for indices, because again, risk on risk of sentiment tells us that when money's flowing into the dollar, which it will if the inflationary numbers are upticking, and we're due a retracement because of that now, what that would then mean is that, okay, cool, great, money's going to be flowing out of risky assets and into or risk on assets, should I say, and flowing into risk off assets. So if that's the case, we can potentially start to anticipate, a larger retracement on indices, Now, I don't think it's a coincidence that at the same time as PCE has come out higher, which basically makes all of the inflationary measures year on year, all higher than, they've all upticked. What that then means is that, I just don't think it's a coincidence that at the same time as PC comes out higher, we're now seeing all-time highs hit on indices, well, apart from US indices, apart from US 30. US 30 is the only US index that hasn't hit all-time highs. Because if we quickly look at S&P 500 for a minute, that's hit all-time highs, and so is NASDAQ, right? So again, just going to US 30 for a minute, I'm going to be honest, I don't really know what price is going to do from here. Is price going to come up, hit all-time highs, and then, cascade alongside the other two potentially? Maybe, because at that point, again, we're still in a seek and destroy phase. But once we take this higher, then technically we're not. So we could then potentially see price come down back to the 50%. So for me, again, at this point in time, I don't really know what to do with US 30. So it's going to be, out of the three US indices that I'm looking at, it's going to be the only one that it's going to be my least favored right now. I'll put it like that, right? So yeah, that's what I'm going to be looking at personally. Now, for S&P 500, where we have actually hit all-time highs, I don't really want to be buying, at all-time highs. If I am going to, I'm going to be very fucking cautious as I'm doing it, right? But I don't really want to. Would you want to buy Bitcoin at all-time highs? If your answer is yes, then you need to go and do some work on your understanding of how these markets work. Because again, like, if we're hitting all-time highs, the only two things that the markets, that price wants to do is seek and destroy and rebalance itself. So if we're bullish, right, price is going to seek and destroy the highs, then rebalance, then seek and destroy, then rebalance, seek and destroy, then rebalance, right? And obviously, for bearish market, it's going to seek and destroy the lows, then rebalance up, seek and destroy the lows, rebalance up, and so on and so forth. So if that's the case, we've just sort of destroyed, the previous high. We're at all-time highs right now, and what are institutions usually doing at all-time highs? They're taking their profit, because the institutions were obviously buying from lower down. So if price is up here, think about what you do if you buy down here, and then price is all the way up here. You're telling me you're not going to take partials or close the whole trade? Of course you are. And the institutions don't work any different. So for me, I'm anticipating us getting that massive, well, it doesn't have to be massive, but that retracement. I want to see that retracement. So on S&P 500, what I want to see is if we can potentially break this low and give another redistribution, then I will entertain sells. I don't think I'll entertain sells outside of that. I want to make sure that, okay, yeah, great, we've broken this low. Okay, fine. Price can just continue higher if it wanted to. So for me, I want to see a distribution form, like something like this, and then obviously give another redistribution, and I would then look at taking sells off of that. So That's what I'm going to be looking at in a nutshell for S&P 500. Now, if price comes in here and starts accumulating, for me personally, am I going to take buys? I just don't like it, if I'm being honest. Like all we can do is follow our data, and my data tells me that at all-time highs, I don't really want to be getting into buys at all-time highs, if I'm just being honest. So for me, I'm going to be waiting more on the sell side. Now, if we do get, because I know again, Jerome Powell's going to be speaking on Tuesday or Wednesday, I can't remember the day now. I think it's Tuesday. But when he does speak on that day, it's going to be good to see what he's actually saying, so that it will give me some clues as to, okay, cool. If they're talking about, our inflation's cooling, and, inflation is, we're looking to potentially, they're not going to say it like this, but if they allude to them cutting rates in July, because I've heard some talks in the grapevine of it either being July or September. If it's seeming like more July, then I will revisit the information and the data and have a look. But right now, as it stands, I'm not interested in taking buys from this point. So, yeah, moving on to S&P 500, very similar story, if I'm being honest. We just hit all-time highs, and the PCE came out higher. So it just doesn't seem like a coincidence that the two are happening at around the same sort of time. So for me, again, I'm going to be looking at more on the sell side, if I'm being honest. We've got our last reaccumulation over here, very similar to S&P 500. So if that's the case, if we can break this, and give a redistribution, fantastic. If not, I'm going to stay on the sidelines until I get more data, personally. Again, I'm happy to do that, because you don't always need to trade. You don't always need to trade at all. So I'm happy to not take a trade, even if I miss out on an opportunity, because I know what my data tells me. If I follow a certain principles over time, I'm going to be profitable. So if I miss a few opportunities where I weren't sure, that's better than me taking a trade I'm not sure of, taking a loss, and having to look at my journal and say, but why the hell did I do that? So again, for not S&P 500, for Nasdaq, I'm going to be looking at price breaking this low, give me a redistribution, and send it lower. That's what I'm going to be looking at personally, right? So moving down to UK 100. UK 100 is an interesting one, because we haven't hit all-time highs, right? But we've obviously started, started printing a bearish market cycle. We had a distribution up here, we redistributed again, and as it goes, it looks to me as if we've got like a slanted distribution going on right now, a diagonal distribution, if you will, where we're seeing sellers, coming in. We've had sell drives, sell orders coming in, sell orders coming in, sell orders coming in. We've seen a manipulation of the highs, and we've had a sign of weakness that's broken this low. So for me, I'm going to be, having a look at what happens tomorrow. If price, after New York Stock Exchange open, price is in here and it's distributing on a lower time frame, great, I'll look at taking some sells. If price breaks this high, sells are off the table. But up until that point, if we start to see sellers coming in, I'm going to be looking at taking some sells personally. So it'll be interesting to see what price does. Moving over to the Nikkei, I'll be honest, I don't even know what to do with this thing right now. It looks like AWS, right? So for me, we haven't taken our all-time highs just yet. I don't really know what to do with this thing. I'm more on the sell side for this thing personally, because again, I get that Japanese yen's inflation rates came out lower last week. However, it's still not at their target yet. And if it's not at their target, in the way I see it, one of two things are going to happen. They're either going to keep rates, like, they're not going to cut the rates, is what I'm saying, right? Because I think they're either going to keep the rates the same, which is, again, not bullish, it's not going to be bearish for it's not going to be bearish for the yen, because again, inflation rates are still high, or they are going to hike the rates to try and bring inflation down even more. Either way, it's not going to be bearish. So if we're not going to be bearish on the yen, if the yen's going to continue to be strong, that means that Japanese investors, or investors of, in Japan, are going to be putting their money into the bonds rather than the stock market, So if that's the case, and money's flowing into bonds, I don't really want to be buying this thing when when money's flowing out of it, because that would then send this market lower. So for me personally, I'm going to be on the sell side, but not right now. There's too much it looks like buyers are in control of this market right now. So I don't really want to try and fight against that. You know, if you're in a C, right? And this is the last thing I want to end off on, right? If you're in a C and the current is pushing that way, and you're trying to swim this way with your little self, you know, got my swimming man in here, right? You're trying to swim this way against the current. You're either gonna get tired and just end up going with the current anyway, or you're gonna drown because you can't do it anymore, and you're fighting against the current of water, you know. So again, for me, I don't want to do that because I don't want my MetaTrader 4 to drown, right? I don't want my account to drown. So for me personally, I'm gonna be leaving this thing alone until I've got more clarity on what's going on, and that's okay. You know, I always say to people that I work with, like, it's fine to not take a trade or to not know what something's doing. What it's not fine to do is not know what something's doing and trade it anyway, because that's just dumb, right? So I hope this finds you guys well. I hope you guys learned something from this. Let me know in the comments what the thing was that you learned the most, or what your biggest takeaway was from this as well, as it helps me improve on my content. And I want to help you guys as much as I can. If you want to work with myself personally, my Instagram will be underneath the bio of this thing right now. I'm still getting used to the whole YouTube thing, so guys, bear with me, right? But yeah, if you want to work with me personally, send me a message. Find me on my Instagram. If you have any questions about the way I approach the market, ask in the comments. If there's any type of content you want to put out, just let me know. Let me know, and I'm gonna do that for you guys, right? So without any further ado, ladies and gents, I've been Mr. Nate B Lit. You guys have been incredible, and I will see you guys maybe in a week. I'm gonna film another piece of content during the week as well. It's gonna get done. So I'll see you guys later in the week. But yeah, like I said, if you guys need anything, find me on Instagram or any of my social media, and I'll be more than happy to help. Take care, and remember to keep your head on that bread.